The Montclair estate was a kingdom built on glass and steel, perched high above the city like a monument to ambition. From the marble gates at the entrance to the sprawling gardens that seemed to stretch endlessly, every inch of the property whispered wealth, order, and power. Yet behind the perfection of its golden chandeliers and immaculate lawns lay an emptiness so heavy that even silence felt alive. Asterisk. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video, because when you stop doing this, YouTube understands that you didn't like this content and stops recommending good stories like this. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. At the heart of this fortress of wealth lived Alexander Montclair, a billionaire industrialist whose empire spanned continents. To the world, he was a titan ruthless in business, calculated in every decision, a man who could bend governments with a single phone call. But behind the oak doors of his study, where mahogany shelves towered with unread classics and deals worth billions lay stacked on his desk, Alexander was simply a father, and a broken one. For his only daughter, Isabella, had been born blind. From the day of her birth, when the doctor whispered the truth in hushed tones to avoid shattering the moment, Alexander's life had been marked by a wound that no amount of money could heal. He had flown specialists from Switzerland, Japan, the United States, names that commanded respect in medical journals. Each one had studied Isabella with gentle hands and heavy words, offering little more than condolences wrapped in scientific certainty. And so Isabella grew. Not into the bright, laughing child Alexander had once imagined, but into a fragile girl of 8 who lived in quiet shadows. She rarely spoke, often retreating to the corners of her room, her small hands stretched out as if feeling for a world she could never fully touch. To the staff, she was mysterious, untouchable, sometimes frightening in her silence. Alexander loved her fiercely, but his love was a battlefield. He could command men, crush competitors, and build empires, but he could not coax a smile from his own child. And every failure cut him deeper. That evening, the Montclair mansion was preparing for something unusual. A new maid was arriving. Another one? Alexander muttered bitterly as he swirled the amber liquid in his crystal glass. His voice carried a weight that made even seasoned staff step back. "Yes, sir," replied Mr. Hawthorne, the long-serving butler whose silver hair and composed demeanor made him almost part of the furniture. "The agency insisted. She is different. Alexander's brow furrowed. He gave a hollow laugh. "Do they think miracles come with aprons and dusting cloths now?" The butler hesitated. He had learned long ago that speaking too much in front of his master was dangerous. Still, there was something in the young woman's file, something that had made him pause. But he swallowed his words. Moments later, the heavy doors of the side entrance opened, and a young woman stepped timidly inside. Her name was Clara Reyes. She did not look like she belonged in this palace of marble and gold. Her dress was simple, neat, but clearly worn. Her shoes had carried her through long journeys and hard days. Her hair was tied in a practical braid, and her hands carried the faint roughness of honest work. She clutched the strap of her small handbag as though it were the only anchor keeping her steady. Her eyes widened as she took in the grandeur of the mansion. Chandeliers that shimmered like constellations. Oil paintings older than her village church. Hallways lined with carpets so thick her footsteps disappeared into them. It was a world she had only read about. Standing in it made her feel both tiny and defiant. Alexander descended the grand staircase, his presence filling the room before his words did. He studied Clara with the practiced gaze of a man who sized up investments worth billions. "So," he said flatly, "you're the one they sent." Clara straightened her posture, though her heart raced. "Yes, sir. My name is Clara. I'm here to care for Miss Isabella." Alexander let the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. Then, with a cold smile, he asked, "And what makes you think you can do what countless others have failed at? What makes you think you can reach my daughter?" Clara's fingers tightened around her bag. She wanted to look away, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "Because I don't see her as broken, sir. I see her as a child who is waiting for someone to listen." For the first time in a long while, Alexander's composure faltered. Just slightly. his lips pressed into a thin line as he studied her. At that moment, a soft sound broke the tension, the faint shuffle of small feet on the polished marble. Isabella had appeared at the top of the staircase, guided by the familiar railing. Her dark hair framed her pale face, her unseeing eyes drifting as if searching for an anchor in the room. She wore a simple white dress that made her look like a porcelain doll misplaced in a castle. Clara's breath caught. This was the child everyone had whispered about. Isabella paused, sensing unfamiliar energy in the room. Her voice, barely above a whisper, floated down the stairs. "Papa, who's here?" Alexander's face softened in a way that only his daughter could make possible. "It's just a new helper, darling," he said, his tone warmer now. "Come, Isabella." But Isabella did not move. Instead, she tilted her head, listening. Her unseeing eyes shifted toward Clara, as though she could feel her presence. For a brief moment, as the air between them seemed charged to souls recognizing something unspoken, Clara took a cautious step forward. "Hello, Isabella," she said gently, her voice carrying warmth like sunlight breaking through clouds. "My name is Clara." The girl's lips parted slightly, as though she wanted to respond. But then, just as quickly, she retreated into silence, her small hands clutching the banister. Alexander sighed heavily. "You'll see for yourself," he said, turning back to Clara. "She doesn't talk to anyone. Don't take it personally." None of them lasted long. But Clara, standing in the golden light of the grand hall, felt something stirred deep inside her. She couldn't explain why, but she believed that Isabella's silence wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning, and somewhere in the echoes of the mansion's vast corridors, secrets waited to be uncovered. The first morning in the Montclair mansion was unlike anything Clara had ever known. The air was thick with silence, not the peaceful kind, but the silence of a house where laughter had long since died. Sunlight poured through tall glass windows, spilling across the marble floors, but it felt cold. As though warmth had no permission here, Clara rose before dawn, tying her braid with careful fingers. She moved through the halls with quiet reverence, still in awe of the wealth around her. Chandeliers glistened above like frozen constellations. Every corridor seemed endless, echoing her footsteps back at her. Yet beneath the grandeur, Clara noticed the emptiness, the untouched vases of fresh flowers. The clocks ticking too loudly. The air of a place where time itself felt unwelcome. Her first task was breakfast with Isabella. The little girl sat in the sunroom, where tall windows overlooked manicured gardens. A tray of food lay untouched before her. Scrambled eggs, toast, fruit cut into perfect cubes. Her small hands fiddled with the corner of her napkin, her face turned slightly away as though she were listening to the world beyond the glass rather than the one inside the room. Clara approached carefully. "Good morning, Isabella," she said softly. No reply. Clara pulled out a chair and sat across from her. She tried again. "I'm Clara. I'll be helping you from now on. Do you like strawberries?" The child's blind eyes remained fixed on nothing, her lips pressed in silence. Clara felt the weight of it but didn't give up. She gently moved the plate closer. "I used to pick strawberries with my grandmother," Clara continued, her voice calm, patient. "They stained our fingers red and we would laugh because it looked like we'd been painting. Maybe one day I can tell you more stories about her." Still nothing. Isabella reached for her glass of juice, found it after fumbling slightly, and took a small sip without acknowledging Clara. The door opened, and Alexander Montclair entered. Already in a tailored suit, his phone pressed to his ear. His voice filled the room with its commanding tone. He ended the call abruptly and fixed his gaze on Clara. "Well?" he asked, his arms folding. "How's the miracle worker doing?" Clara's cheeks flushed. "She hasn't spoken to me yet, sir." "But it's the first morning. She needs time?" Alexander cut in sharply. His eyes flashed with impatience. "Do you know how many people told me she just needs time? Time has given me nothing but silence." Isabella's small hands tightened around her napkin. The tension in her father's voice seemed to coil inside her like a snake. "Papa," she whispered faintly, her voice barely audible. Alexander instantly softened, crouching beside her chair. Yes, my darling. But Isabella did not continue. Her lips closed again, her silence returning like a fortress wall. Alexander sighed deeply, then turned to Clara with an expression that was part anger, part exhaustion. You see, this is what I live with. A daughter who won't speak. A house full of strangers who claim they can fix what can't be fixed. I don't need more empty promises. Clara steadied herself, her hands clasped together under the table. With respect, sir, I'm not promising anything. I'm just asking for the chance to listen to her. To try. Alexander's jaw tightened. He looked at Clara as though she were a naive child playing at hope in a world that had already taught him despair. But there was something in her eyes, an unwavering gentleness that made it impossible to dismiss her completely. Fine, he said at last, his voice clipped. You have 1 week. If she doesn't respond to you, you're gone. Understand? Clara nodded, her heart pounding. Yes, sir. After Alexander left the room, silence fell once more. Clara turned back to Isabella, whose fingers now tapped rhythmically against the table, as though keeping time to a melody. Only she could hear Clara leaned forward. You don't have to talk to me yet, she whispered. But I'll be here every day. I'm not going anywhere, for the briefest moment. Isabella's tapping slowed, as though she had heard something in Clara's tone. But then it resumed, faster, more guarded. That night, Clara lay awake in her small servants' quarters, the echoes of the mansion pressing down on her. She thought of Isabella's unspoken pain, of Alexander's cold despair, and of her own promise. Something inside her refused to accept failure. But in the darkness, a question haunted her. What secret binds this family so tightly in silence? And though she did not yet know it, the answer would shake the very foundations of the Montclair Empire. The days passed slowly inside the Montclair mansion. Each hallway Clara walked felt like a test, each glance from the staff a reminder that no one believed she would last. The cooks whispered in the kitchen, the maids traded knowing looks, and the butler, Mr. Hawthorne, remained politely detached. Everyone had seen this before, new caretakers, hopeful and eager, eventually broken by Isabella's silence and Alexander's fury. But Clara was not like the others. Every morning, she rose with determination. She greeted Isabella with the same gentle warmth, even if the girl turned her face away. She described the colors of the sunrise, though Isabella could not see them. She spoke of the garden, the rustle of leaves, the sound of the fountain, the way the roses smelled when the breeze carried their perfume indoors, and slowly, something began to shift. One afternoon, Clara led Isabella to the garden. The girl walked hesitantly, her hand gripping the maid's arm with surprising strength. Clara guided her step by step, pausing whenever Isabella faltered. Listen, Clara whispered as they reached the fountain. Do you hear it? Isabella tilted her head. The water trickled like music, steady and calm. It's like bells, Isabella murmured, so faintly Clara almost didn't hear. Clara froze, her heart racing. It was the first voluntary word Isabella had spoken to her. Yes, Clara said, her voice trembling with excitement. Like bells. The fountain is singing for you. For a moment, Isabella's lips curved barely a smile, fragile as glass, but real. Clara's chest tightened with emotion. That evening, at dinner, Alexander sat at the head of the long dining table, scrolling through emails on his tablet, while Isabella picked at her food in silence. Clara, standing discreetly nearby, gathered her courage. Sir, she began softly, may I tell you something about today? Alexander looked up, his expression already impatient. If this is about her not eating again, I already know. Clara shook her head. No, it's about the garden. She spoke to me. The words made the room go still. The silverware in Alexander's hand paused midair. Slowly he turned to his daughter. Isabella. Is that true? The girl shifted in her chair, her small hands fidgeting with the edge of her dress. She didn't answer. Darling, did you say something to Clara? Alexander's voice softened, but it trembled beneath the weight of desperate hope. Still, Isabella remained silent. Her eyes turned downward, her body closing in on itself. Alexander's jaw tightened. He pushed his plate away, frustration boiling beneath the surface. "This is cruel," he muttered. "Cruel to tell me she spoke when she didn't?" "She did," Clara insisted, her voice breaking with conviction. "She said the fountain sounded like bells." "I swear it, sir. I wouldn't lie about this." Alexander's eyes darkened. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Do you know how many people have tried to give me false hope? Do you know what it feels like to believe only to have it ripped away?" His voice thundered across the dining hall, echoing against the marble. Isabella flinched, her tiny body curling inward as if trying to disappear. Clara, trembling, forced herself to step forward. "I am not like them," she spoke. "She is reaching for something. Sir, you just don't see it because your pain blinds you." The words hung heavy in the air. For a long moment, Alexander stared at her, fury battling disbelief. Finally, with a sharp gesture, he turned and stormed out of the room, at his footsteps fading into the mansion's endless corridors. Silence returned. Isabella's breathing was shaky, her small fingers gripping her napkin. Clara knelt beside her chair, her voice soft as a lullaby. "It's all right," she whispered. "I'm still here. I heard you, Isabella, and I'll never stop listening." For the first time, Isabella turned her face toward Clara perfectly, but close enough that it felt intentional. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Still, in that fragile moment, Clara knew. A door had begun to open. Later that night, Clara sat by her small window in the servants' wing, staring at the moonlight spilling across the floor. She replayed Isabella's words over and over in her mind. Like bells, it wasn't much, but it was enough to prove that somewhere inside that quiet little girl was a voice waiting to be heard, and Clara had promised herself she would be the one to find it. What she didn't know was that this fragile progress would ignite storms in the mansion, storms that could destroy everything. The fragile thread of hope that Clara had stitched into the Montclair household did not last long. Progress, however small, often brings with it envy, doubt, and the heavy shadow of fear. The mansion, once merely silent, now buzzed with whispers. The cooks gossiped in the kitchen. The maids muttered in the corridors. "They say the girl spoke to her," one maid whispered, glancing around nervously. "It's impossible," another replied. "She hasn't said a word to anyone for years. Why her? She's just a servant. Maybe she made it up." Trying to get in the master's good graces, Clara heard the rumors, though no one spoke them to her face. She carried them quietly, her only focus still Isabella, but Alexander was a different storm. Ever since Clara's bold declaration at dinner, his moods had grown unpredictable. Sometimes he watched Isabella with a desperation that frightened her. Other times, he lashed out at Clara, accusing her of filling the house with false hope. One evening, as thunder rumbled outside, the storm inside the mansion finally broke. Isabella sat in her room, the rain tapping softly against the tall windows. Clara knelt beside her, guiding the girl's hands over a small music box she had brought from her own village. It was wooden, simple, the kind of object that had no place in the luxury of the Montclair mansion. But when Clara wound it, the delicate melody filled the air like a fragile thread of light. Isabella's fingers trembled over the carvings. She tilted her head, listening intently. Then, in a soft, trembling voice, she whispered, "It feels like sunlight." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, Isabella, exactly," but just as the moment bloomed, the door burst open. Alexander stood in the doorway, his face dark, his eyes ablaze with suspicion. "What is this?" he demanded. Clara stood quickly, startled. "It's just a music box, sir." I was showing her. "Where did you get that?" His voice was sharp, almost accusing. "From my home," Clara replied carefully. "It's nothing valuable." "Just nothing valuable?" Alexander's laugh was bitter. "This house is not a playground for your peasant trinkets. Do you think cheap toys will fix what the greatest doctors in the world could not?" Clara's face burned with humiliation. But before she could answer, Isabella whispered, "Papa." Alexander froze. His gaze snapped to his daughter. "What did you say?" Isabella shrank back, her hands clutching the music box. Her lips pressed shut again. Alexander turned back to Clara, his fury exploding. You coached her. You put words in her mouth so I'd believe your lies. No. Clara's voice broke with desperation. I swear, sir, she said it on her own. She's finding her way, you just enough. His shout thundered louder than the storm outside. Do not manipulate my daughter. Do not ever fill her head or mine with fantasies. Isabella flinched, tears spilling silently down her cheeks. Clara's heart shattered at the sight. She wanted to protect the child, to shield her from the man who loved her, but could not see past his own despair. Sir, Clara whispered, her voice trembling but firm, you're so blinded by your pain that you can't see her light. Isabella is not hopeless. She's reaching out, but you're too afraid to believe it. The room fell into heavy silence. Rain lashed against the windows like furious applause. Alexander's hands clenched at his sides. For a moment, Clara thought he might strike her. But instead, he turned away, his voice low and broken. Get out. Leave this room. Clara hesitated, glancing at Isabella. Clutched the music box as though it were the only safe thing in her world. Clara wanted to stay, but Alexander's tone left no room for defiance. She stepped into the hallway, her chest heaving, tears burning her eyes. Behind her, the door shut with a final devastating slam. That night, Clara was summoned to the study. The air inside was heavy with cigar smoke, the fire casting harsh shadows against the walls. Alexander sat behind his massive desk, his face hidden in the glow of his laptop screen. You will leave tomorrow, he said without. Looking up, the words hit Clara like a knife. Leave. But sir, I will not have you confusing my daughter with your illusions. You've done enough damage. Clara's voice cracked, but she forced herself to stand tall. I haven't damaged her, sir. I've given her something no one else has hope. You're the one tearing it away. Alexander's eyes finally lifted, and for the first time, Clara saw the man beneath the armor, the grief, the exhaustion, the fear of believing in miracles only to be broken again. Hope is dangerous, he whispered. Hope is the cruelest lie of all. And with that, he dismissed her, leaving Clara alone in the flickering shadows of the study, her heart breaking not for herself, but for Isabella, who was about to lose the only friend who truly saw her. But destiny had not yet finished weaving its storm. Something far darker was about to descend on the Montclair mansion, and it would force Alexander to confront the truth he had buried for too long. The storm outside had not ended. Days of relentless rain battered the city, flooding streets and shaking the Montclair estate to its core. Inside the mansion, the tension was worse than the thunder. It was a silence heavy with unspoken words. Regret and fear, Clara was set to leave. Her small suitcase was packed in the servants' quarters. Every folded dress a reminder of the bond she was being forced to abandon. Yet her heart would not allow her to let go not of Isabella. On the night before her departure, Clara slipped quietly into the girl's room. Isabella sat on her bed, the music box clutched tightly in her hands. The melody had long wound down, but she held it as if afraid someone might take it away. Clara sat gently on the edge of the bed. I don't know if I'll see you again after tomorrow, she whispered. But I need you to know something, Isabella. You are not broken. You are not less. You are extraordinary. And no matter what your father or anyone else says, I believe in you. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, Isabella's small voice trembled through the air. Clara. Don't go! Clara froze, tears springing to her eyes. It was the clearest, strongest thing Isabella had ever said. But before Clara could answer, the door burst open. Alexander stood in the doorway, his face pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. He had come to check on his daughter, but what he heard struck him like lightning. Isabella. His voice shook. Did you just speak? The girl turned toward the sound of his voice, her blind eyes filling with tears. For the first time, she reached out not to Clara, but to him. Papa, she whispered, don't be angry. Alexander staggered forward, his knees buckling as he fell beside her bed. His strong, unshakable frame shook with sobs he had buried for years. He grasped her tiny hands, his tears falling onto them like rain. "My God, my sweet girl, you can speak. All this time, why didn't you?" Isabella's voice cracked like fragile glass. "Because you never listened." The words tore Alexander apart. He bowed his head, crushed beneath the truth of his daughter's pain. Clara, standing at the side of the room, felt her heart breaking too, but with relief, with awe, with the dawning of something miraculous. Alexander looked up at Clara then, his face raw, vulnerable, stripped of all arrogance. You did this," he said, almost in disbelief. "You reached her when no one else could." But before gratitude could take root, Isabella suddenly shuddered. Her small body trembled violently, her breathing ragged. "Papa, it hurts," she gasped, clutching her chest. Panic erupted. Alexander shouted for the butler, for the doctor, for anyone who could help. Clara cradled Isabella, her calm voice cutting through the chaos. "Breathe, Isabella. Stay with me. You're safe. You're not alone anymore." The storm outside raged louder, lightning splitting the sky. In that moment of terror, Alexander finally understood. All his wealth, all his power, had been nothing compared to the fragile heartbeat of his daughter. And now, that heartbeat was slipping away. Hours later, after doctors rushed in and the house became a flurry of emergency, Isabella slept in a fragile, feverish state. The illness that had been quietly brewing and gnawed in the shadows of her silence had finally erupted. Alexander sat at her bedside, holding her hand like a lifeline. Clara sat across from him, her presence steady and unwavering at last. Alexander whispered into the dim room, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "I was wrong. About everything. About hope. About her. About you." Clara looked at him, her eyes tired but resolute. "She doesn't need perfection, sir. She needs love. And love requires listening, even when it hurts." Alexander closed his eyes, the weight of his empire crumbling under the truth of those words. As dawn broke, Isabella stirred. She opened her eyes not to see, for she could not but to feel, and for the first time she smiled. Her face lit with a fragile but undeniable joy. "Papa," she whispered, her voice steady. "The music. It's still playing." Alexander's tears fell freely as he clutched her hand. He could not hear the melody, but he realized she did not need sight to see, nor sound to believe. She had her own light, and thanks to Clara, that light had finally broken through the darkness. The Montclair mansion, once a fortress of silence, began to breathe again. Days after the storm and Isabella's sudden illness, the estate was transformed. The heavy curtains were drawn back to let the sun pour in. The gardens, once admired only for their perfection, now echoed with the sound of footsteps, small, careful ones, guided not by fear but by trust. And in the center of it all was Isabella. She had not been cured of her blindness, nor had the fever vanished without leaving scars of fragility. But something far greater had changed. Her voice, once locked away in silence, now began to bloom. At first in whispers, then in hesitant sentences, and finally in small bursts of laughter that startled everyone who heard it. It was as though the walls of the mansion had cracked open, and through them poured a light that had been waiting all along. One afternoon, Alexander stood on the terrace, watching Clara walk slowly with Isabella across the lawn. The child's hand clutched Clara's tightly, her blind eyes turned toward the sound of the fountain. "Do you hear it, Clara?" Isabella asked softly. "Yes, my dear," Clara replied with a smile. "It sounds just like bells." Isabella giggled, the sound pure and unguarded. For Alexander, standing in the shadows of the terrace, it was the most precious music he had ever known, for the first time in years. He felt his heart beating with something other than bitterness, something dangerously close to peace. That evening, summoned Clara to his study. The firelight painted the walls in warm hues, but his expression was solemn. Clara stood nervously, hands clasped, unsure if she was to be dismissed again. Alexander rose from his chair and approached her. For a man who commanded boardrooms and governments, The weight of his next words was heavier than any deal he had ever made. "Clara," he began, his voice quieter than she had ever heard. "You came here as a maid, humble, ordinary, and yet you gave my daughter something that money, doctors, and all my power could not." Clara's eyes softened, but she said nothing. "You gave her a voice," Alexander continued, emotion trembling beneath his words. "You gave me back my child." He paused, then bowed his head slightly, a gesture so foreign to him it stunned Clara. "For that, I owe you more than I can ever repay." Clara shook her head. "You don't owe me anything, sir. Isabella didn't need miracles. She only needed to be loved for who she is, not mourned for what she isn't." Alexander closed his eyes, her words piercing deeper than any truth he had ever faced. When he opened them again, they shone with something almost unrecognizable in the man who had once called hope a lie. Humility. "Stay," he said firmly. "Not as a servant. Not as a caretaker. But as part of this family, Isabella needs you. And so do I." Tears welled in Clara's eyes, but she nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. The weeks turned into months. The mansion, once oppressive, grew alive with warmth. Isabella's laughter echoed down the halls. She and Clara shared stories, songs, and secrets, while Alexander, though clumsy at first, learned to join them, no longer a distant ruler of his domain, but a father rediscovering the simple joy of listening. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the three of them sat together in the garden by the fountain. Isabella leaned against her father, the music box playing softly in Clara's hands. "Papa," Isabella whispered. "Yes, my darling. Do you hear it now? The bells?" Alexander listened, his throat tightening. The fountain's trickle, the music box's melody, the laughter of his daughter Rit, was all one song. And for the first time, he truly heard it. "Yes, Isabella," he said, kissing the top of her head. "I hear it, and it's the most beautiful sound in the world." Isabella smiled, her blind eyes glowing with peace. Clara's hand rested gently on the girl's shoulder. Her own heart full, the Montclair mansion had finally found its light, not through wealth, not through power, but through love born in the unlikeliest of places, and the lesson that echoed through its golden halls was one Xander Montclair would carry for the rest of his life. Miracles are not bought. They are found in the courage to listen, the strength to hope, and the grace to love.